Hello, everybody, and welcome to Behind the Camera. So here we are with episode 86 of Behind the Camera, and this week my guest is crisis communications consultant and debut novelist John David. We talk John's life and career and eventual move into fictional writing with his award-winning debut novel, The Bystander, which was actually inspired by a real-life event. And you can find the link to this novel and to John's socials all in the description. As always, if you'd like to stay connected with Behind the Camera, all of my links are also in the description, including the pre-order for my upcoming book, Behind the Camera, The Journey So Far, releasing on the 5th of March on Amazon. And I'm also on Patreon. For £3 a month, you can get extra behind-the-scenes content, access to an exclusive series where I catch up with old guests, and much more. But now, here's the interview. John, welcome to Behind the Camera podcast. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show today. How are we doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. So you, your career has sort of like taken on many forms from what I've been able to gather. But first I want to kind of jump into you being a public relations and crisis communications consultant, because that sticks out a lot to me and it seems a very interesting title, and especially with you being a writer as well. So can you just like take us through like your background of this and how it's tied into your writing career?
Sure. Happy to. So I started my career. I've always been in PR consulting, media relations, working for helping organizations communicate better with the traditional press, and that's kind of evolved over the span of my career. I've been doing it for a while, and now I focus a large part of my business is on crisis communications. So working with companies when they're having issues regarding the media, like reporters are calling and they don't know what to say, kind of thing. Sometimes it's, sometimes there's a bona fide crazy thing happening. Sometimes it's just an overly aggressive reporter. Sometimes it's news that the company maybe doesn't want to, they don't want to talk about too much. They have to, but they want to be, they want to minimize what they're saying. And so a lot of what I do is, developing messaging and dealing with journalists and that whole world. And so I've been in communications now for more than 30 years. And, it kind of bled over into my my writing career. I've always been a writer, but I started writing fiction a few years ago, and my first novel is called The Bystander, and the protagonist is a television reporter, and so that's kind of how. And I've never been a television reporter, but I know a lot of television reporters, and I've worked with, I don't know, hundreds of journalists, I guess, over my career, at least, maybe thousands. I don't even know. I'd have to go back and check. Well, there's probably no way of checking, but I'll say it, probably thousands of journalists. And so I kind of get that world. And that's what when I started my kind of storytelling journey. That's how it all kind of funneled together.
Yeah, it is incredible how you spend so much time surrounded by different people that you get like a kind of grips as to what they do, especially with yourself. You're not a news reporter or a journalist, but you have dealt with them so much over this long period of time that, obviously it kind of helps your job become second nature in terms of what it is that you say to them to kind of either deflect or give as neutral an answer as possible that's, non-defamatory to, the companies you're protecting. So on that, like, how does that sort of develop in terms of whenever you are like faced with this scenario from like a journalist, like a really pushy journalist, like how do you kind of come up with the right things to say essentially?
It's a great question. It's a great question. I mean, first thing is that, so I went to the university, I went to college, I studied journalism. And so I have a background I understand kind of the rules of engagement because I studied journalism, which helps. There are kind of rules of engagement. So it helps to know that, and then at the same time, reporters they have a job to do that they have something they're trying to accomplish. And at the same time, most of my clients, they want to play, like they want to be in the game. They want to communicate what's going on. They don't just want to clam up, but they also at the same time, journalists have uh, they have they can make a case, I guess, for certain things, certain bits of information that they want, and then there's other stuff which they can't make a case for. And so so when you're a consultant working for a company and you're getting inquiries that are maybe uncomfortable from a media outlet, you have to know, like what's sort of acceptable and what you're willing to tell them and what they should be okay with receiving and what they should realize, well, listen, we're not going to tell you that, because of one reason or another. Maybe it's because we're a private company and it's not, it's very politely, it's none of your business, and so that's kind of the gist of it, is really kind of understanding the rules of engagement, and then communicating how the organization you're representing, how they want to present themselves. And that's really the key. And then sometimes it's educational. I've had plenty of instances where I've had journalists who just got bad information, and you have to kind of explain to them, listen, you got bad information here, and I'm gonna tell you exactly why, and I'm gonna get some more stuff for you. I'll get back to you in a couple hours, and then we're gonna have a conversation, and then you're gonna realize that there's no fire here. You think there's a fire here, there's no fire here, kind of thing. And it's not that I'm trying to, do the Jedi mind trick on them or anything. It's that I'm just telling them the truth. Like, listen, you got bad information, and there's really nothing here. It doesn't always work, because sometimes they report on the bad information, but
Yeah,
it helps if you communicate with them.
oh, for sure. Because obviously with journalism, like news reporters, journalists, like their job is ultimately to get a headline and then sort of make a story behind that headline from what the information that they're given. Like, and when you're dealing with that, is there like an element of trust that you have to have with the journalist, that nothing's going to get spun in like a negative light, for example?
Sure. I mean, it helps if you have a pre-existing relationship. Also, you have to be a quick judge of character, and also past performance often dictates future performance. And so there are some reporters out there who don't, who kind of go whatever, fast and loose with the rules. And so you have to, I say the rules of engagement, they kind of go fast and loose with the rules. And so maybe we're not going to talk to this guy or that gal or that person because they have a history of really not treating us fairly.
Yeah.
And that's really what you really want, is you want to be treated fairly. Because when you're dealing with a communications crisis, because most of the time it's not a nefarious thing, it's just something happens, and a business is trying to accomplish something, and maybe there's some element arose, right? And it's not like, they're doing something terrible. It's unexpected, or something's happening that it's out of their control. I always tell people, the whole story, when you see these stories of journalists who are like, following some executive when he's at the golf course, and running down the street with a camera and, and a microphone. That didn't happen that morning. That happened from, that journalist has been trying to reach that person for weeks or months. And they just, and now it looks really dramatic that they're hunting them down when they're stepping out of a hotel, or when they're getting ready to go play golf or whatever. It's like that ambush that doesn't happen instantly. That happens over a long period of time by someone who decides that they just don't want to talk. And I don't necessarily agree with the ambush thing, but sometimes I think kind of the average Joe thinks that that's how reporters are, and they're not. Mainly they don't want to get up and go to the country club to go chase a guy on. They'd rather get the story done 3 days earlier so they could move on to the next thing, and because they want to go. They celebrate holidays like the rest of us. They like their weekends off like the rest of us. They got kids they got ball games to go to, all that stuff. And if you realize, if you understand that part of the world, then you're better off too.
Yeah, like it's interesting that you bring that up, because there is that reputation that reporters are just like always waiting in the wings for somebody to appear. Like there is just, I think that's just maybe the sort of what social media kind of
In
teaches
the
us,
movies.
really, in a way. Movies, social
In the
media,
movies,
things like
yeah.
that.
In the
Yeah,
movie.
where it's just like at any given moment, like, you know, a celebrity or any executive, whatever it may be, leaves a hotel and then there's all of a sudden journalists. But
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
probably accounts for a fraction of the time,
Yeah,
really.
I mean there's certainly examples of things that happen. So, for example, I had a few years back, I had a reporter wanted to talk to one of my clients, and I was on the phone with him, and I said, "Well, what do you want to talk about?" And he said, "Well, I'd like to talk about this." And I said, "Well, what do you want to know about that?" He goes, "Well, I'm not going to tell you now because then I won't really be able to ask the question." And so I was like, "Okay, so it won't be a surprise?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I go, "Okay, well, guess what? We're not in the surprise business. You have a question, you can tell me what you want to talk about. We're going to talk about it. We're not going in. I wouldn't do that to you. I wouldn't put you on the record and say, okay, I'm going to bring you my first question is going to be what's your name. My second question is going to be something I'm trying to trip you up with. There's no, like, that's not how it works. And so you have to be able, when you do kind of some of the work that I do, you have to be able to push back to reporters and go, listen, we're not doing it that way. And you write it however you want, but we're not answering that question, and we're certainly not gonna start, talk. We're certainly not gonna, put somebody on the line to talk to you without knowing what the agenda is. And that's kind of one of the things. It's one of your rights as when you're being interviewed is to know what the subject is.
Yeah.
Simple. This is simple. It's a rule. It's a very simple rule, and sometimes journalists don't follow it. But I mean, 99% of the time, and I've been doing this for 30 years, it's the reporter is just trying to they're chasing a lead, trying to tell a good story, trying to get the facts right. They don't want to be wrong, and that 99% of the time, it's a it's a hand in glove type of relationship.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's exactly what you want, because I think obviously, like, misinformation, that seems to be like a hot topic these days, like spreading misinformation. And I think journalists, newspapers, periodicals have really kind of been caught out. It's come to light really more in recent years, have that there's been so much misinformation spread over years. So the fact that now it's like more reputational damage is kind of at stake, really. And so it's kind of good that you have people who just like, listen, this is the story I want here. What can you give me? So you essentially then act as like a safeguard between your clients and the journalists. And does that go as far as, for example, like, if, like you were mentioning before, if you kind of ask them what sort of things they want to talk about, if you can answer that question, is that then sort of an open shut conversation, or is it more a case of you're almost like vetting their questions for your client?
It's a little bit of both. Sometimes, like I said, sometimes there's, I had an instance where I was dealing with a television reporter, and, she was very smart lady, and she had some of the facts, but she didn't have all the facts.
Mm-hmm.
And what I was able to do was have a conversation with her and say, listen, this is not what it looks like. I know what you think it looks like, but this is not what it looks like. This is there's no this yes, I see you, I get it. You see smoke, but I'm telling you there's no fire here, and give me a day and I'm going to explain to you exactly why there's no fire here, and how what you're being told and what someone's telling you, whispering in your ear, is has a kernel of truth to it, but it's not 100%. And so, and then the key as the crisis guy is that I have to come back with an answer, like, because that reporter is not gonna, they're not gonna, they're gonna remember that conversation, and they're gonna say, okay, I talked to this guy, and I'm giving him till tomorrow. And then if 3 days go by and I don't say anything, then it's open season, right? But in this one example I'm thinking about in my head, without getting in all the details, eventually the story went away, because eventually I explained to this reporter, like, this is what's happened. You think this person said X, it's actually Y. It's really nothing. And here's how they're making it. Here's how the company I'm representing is making everything right, and how they're working with local people to make everything right. And it's unfortunate what happened, but it wasn't nearly what it sounds like. And, okay, I get the response, okay, well, I'm going to keep looking into this, and that was 3 years ago. I haven't heard a thing. It's like, it's again, it went away. And so, like, sometimes that's honestly my first goal, is to try to make it go away.
Yeah.
But for the most part, that only works part of the time. So
Oh, of course, of course. And then from like a journalist perspective, then if that's the case where the story then just goes away because the lead kind of comes to an end, it's shut down, like, in the way you just described, does that then affect their reputation, or what are the sort of repercussions for them, like, from what you know?
I mean, listen, if they don't, what ends, again, like we were talking about before. So most journalists, they have, they go to work and they've got, a list of things that they're supposed to go. An editor goes, "So here, go cover this,"
Mm-hmm.
and they're trying to go do all those things, and you might be on their list, or might not be on their list, or you might have someone who does investigative work or whatever, and they'll call you and they'll have a longer agenda and more time. But it's really understanding what they're going for. The main thing is that you one of the things that happens is that I think a lot of companies, they get all caught up in the drama of it, and they don't realize that the the journalist has to tell an accurate story. And so they want to tell the truth, they want to tell an accurate story. They're not just trying to make something up. So if you can explain to them why what they're being told isn't true, then they're gonna beg off, because it's what they're being told isn't true. They're not going to report something that's inaccurate. I mean, it does happen, it absolutely happens, and there's all kinds of cases out there of things that happen. And there's like lawsuits in the US and things like that happen. But again, it's a real, and sometimes they're big, and they're big money things and all that. But for the most part, the average, local reporter who works for a TV station or a newspaper or magazine, they're just trying to do their job, just kind of cover what's in front of them, cover the local news, cover the news of the day, and then and get home in time, get to see the family and the kids, and deal with, make it to the gym on time, and what all that stuff.
Yeah, yeah, of course, of course. Um, so another thing I wanted to talk about was, before we get into your fictional works, your novel writing. You
Sure.
wrote a nonfiction business book, How to Protect or Destroy Your Reputation Online. So what can you tell us about this book? Like, is this tied into, like, directly into the work you've done, in communications, or is this something that, like, you've learned over time and wanted to get down on paper?
Yeah, so that arose probably, so the book came out in 2016, so it's been a bit. And I was doing a lot of work with I was doing a lot of work with online reputation issues for my clients. So what would happen is, and again, if you go back 12 years ago, 10 or 12 years ago, you know, nobody had heard of the dark web. There was no, I don't think there was any Instagram at that point in time. There wasn't even the term influencer, wasn't really even hadn't made any traction yet.
Yeah.
And there was lots of things that were fluctuating around, but there were lots of issues that were happening. People were getting, the main thing is that I would get these inquiries from my clients, and it would usually start with this: there's this story on the internet, about me, or about this topic, or about there, and it's not true, or it's not accurate, or it's this, or it's that. What do I do? Or something would happen, and somebody would get into, and sometimes they were directly, somebody did something bad and it's all over the internet. Sometimes somebody was kind of like victim of friendly fire. Sometimes it was just a coincidence. Sometimes it was just they have the same name as somebody else who did something bad. I had all these, and so I was regularly blogging about this topic. And then one day I kind of like lined up all my blog posts, and I was like, you know what, this could be a book. This could be the table of contents for a book about dealing with reputation issues. And so I'm just silly enough that I kind of cobbled it all together, and I wrote some new chapters, and I tied everything together as best I could, to the point that I thought that I had a manuscript. And I went to go find a freelance editor, and he read it and helped me kind of clean it up a little bit. And I said, listen, what do you think? Do you think I can get this published, or do you think I should just publish this myself? Go to Amazon, publish it myself. And he said, no, this is really a topical thing. This is an area that a lot of people have interest in, and you should try to get this published. And so I was just, again, silly enough to try it. And so I pitched into the agent market, and I was signed by a nonfiction agent. And then they sold my book and I got a small advance, and I finished it, and I published it in 2016. And it covers, some of the stuff's, probably less relevant now than it was, but the core lessons are still important. Like what you should, how to behave online. I think it's probably the biggest one. What to do, what not to do, and that was the starting of my kind of author career.
Yeah, of course. And I think, even some 10 years on, like, regardless of whether things are still relevant or not, or as much, like, it still carries a lot of weight because with cancel culture being what it is, and especially over the last few years, where people will go as far to dig up old bones, old social media posts from people, and then that's kind of their career in the toilet. Like, and of course, like, at the end of the day, people make a choice to put things out on the internet. Other people make a choice to kind of go and find these things, and like, it's kind of is a kind of what goes around comes around situation. So just in regards to then, the like online reputation and the internet and stuff. So being in your career for over 30 years, you'll have seen like such a development, especially, with the internet and like online sort of news and publications. What was that like as you sort of started to get more and more online coverage, as opposed to, say, like just newspaper journalists like ringing you and things like that?
We saw a huge shift, in the PR business. I started, when I started in, my career began, I guess, in like 1990. So I've been in PR for 36 years, going on 36 years. And so when I started, I'm in South Florida. We had two major newspapers. We had, a couple of magazines, a couple of weekly newspapers, some radio stations, whatever it was, four English language TV stations, two Spanish language TV stations. And then we had the national media outlets. That was it. That was the landscape. And everybody read the Miami Herald, basically. Miami Herald had a big business section every Monday, and that's what everybody, I had all corporate clients, and that's all they want to be in. Get me in Business Monday. Get me in Business Monday. That was the big thing. And then things started to shift, and I think the internet started to creep in, and the online world started to make an impact, and it was always really kind of funny. Like the biggest shift, I think, was early on. You would say your client would be interviewed by a journalist, and they would say, "Well, I'm not sure if this is going to get into the newspaper, but we're going to put it online." And when you said that, your client went, "Oh, I'm not going to be in the paper. I'm not going to be in the magazine. I'm only going to be online." And now now if you go to someone and say, "Oh yeah, we did this interview, and it's not going to be online. It's only going to be in the paper." They would be like, "What? Are you kidding me? There's no value in it being in the paper. There's no value in being on print. That gets thrown away tomorrow. I mean, I want to be online forever." And so we've learned this to deal with this whole shift of how of news. And there was just these huge, massive, influential outlets that controlled the news consuming audience, and they're basically gone. They're shadows of what they once were. Many of them are just gone completely. And so we have a much flatter playing field, and which has its pros and cons.
Yeah, of course. And with the shift, then, was there like an influx of media outlets like reaching out to you, like, say, like independent news outlets, for example?
I think things happened more gradually. I think it was more gradual that you'd have. There's still there. The thing you have to remember is that there was, these large media outlets, newspapers in the U.S. Large daily newspapers. There were one or two in every major city in the U.S. And then there were several national newspapers, and they got all the advertising dollars. And then that started to shift, because these new options started coming out where you could be more targeted, right, with your advertising spend. And the newspapers were super slow to react, but they still had these legacy advertisers. They still had a big chunk of, the car dealership business, or the big chunk of the furniture store, that were, really buying a lot of advertising. And the classifieds were another area that the classified advertising was a huge moneymaker for, for these outlets. And that all just started to shift. And it wasn't just like one thing. Like all of a sudden, there's this thing called Craigslist, and folks started to realize, wait a second, the newspaper folks, how come we're not getting these ads anymore, these classified ads? And they go, oh, they're on Craigslist. What's Craigslist? It's like, it didn't all happen at once. It all happened really slowly. And so it was really, the newspapers were like, it was death by 1,000 cuts, And so there's been new outlets, and they would rise up, and you had like the Huffington Post rose up, and now it's sort of flattened out. You have the big outlets. Some of them have transitioned well, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, they're still strong, powerful outlets. But then you have more niche players. You have there's where you go get your political news, where you go get your sports news, where you go get your this, that, and the other thing. What's really been wiped out or completely reimagined is the place where you get like general news about everything. Mm-hmm. That's much harder to come by, because you can't cover it all. The way that they used to, when a newspaper had 300 reporters, or whatever, the New York Times had 1,000 reporters, or whatever it was, they could cover everything. Mm-hmm. They'd cover the New York sports teams, they could cover the New York legislature, they could cover, Washington, they had a bureau in Los Angeles, they had a bureau in Tokyo, all that stuff, and all that. They were covering the world. And you just can't do that anymore. It's just the audience isn't there for it.
No, definitely not. And would you say then the shift is like to change the way that you do your job, or is it really more in the same? It's just the format's different in terms of where the media gets published.
Yeah, no, it's changed. It's absolutely changed the way, it changed the way you do your job, because you have different, we used to follow the flow of the deadlines. It was, you had to reach a newspaper reporter by, if they weren't writing a story by 3:00 in the afternoon, during your local time zone, it wasn't getting in the paper, because they had to turn it into an editor who's got to edit it and finish it. And by 6:00, it's got to be, on the press, for the next morning. It's going to be printed overnight. And then some guy's going to, it's going to be printed and dumped and bound up and thrown on a truck. And then some guy's going to take it and put it in the back of his minivan and throw it, at 5:00 in the morning, throw it onto your, onto your doorstep. So it's just a whole different thing. Now it's all instantaneous. You write something and it's online in a second, or you can blog about it or tweet about it or post on Instagram or whatever instantaneously. So we're just dealing with it's a different ballgame.
Mm-hmm. For sure. It does make me kind of wonder what the future is for printed media and printed news is going to be, because everything you just said, I can't remember working a part-time job like over a decade ago, and it was exactly that. It was like 5:00 in the morning. We might have got into the shop early, and then there was always the big pile of newspapers sitting waiting outside, bound up and everything. And it's I don't know. I can't really see that being the long-term future, because that's the sort of, because it used to be years ago, you used to have like evening newspapers as well. Like that was kind of like your like express way of, like, that was like you were getting quick news. Like if you were getting like a deadline by like 3:00 in the afternoon, it was in the 7:00 paper or something like that. And that died a death.
When I was a kid, I lived in a town. I lived in Western New York, in Buffalo, New York, and we had a morning paper and an evening paper. And my brothers and I used to deliver the evening paper. Oh, wow. And it would arrive. We had there was a big box out in front of our house, and they would drop it off at like whatever it was, like 2:00 in the afternoon. And we get home from school and pick up the paper and have to go, and we'd walk the neighborhood with the, had a route called a paper route, and you knew there was, this house gets the paper, this one doesn't. This guy's got a dog who's kind of mean, this one doesn't. And you deliver the papers, and we'd have to deliver them rain or shine or in the snow and all that. and that was how people got their news. And
Yeah.
the thing here is, like, I believe that we are we're in a very tricky time right now, but we've been in it for probably the past 15 years, not longer. Journalism's going to survive.
Mhm.
Journalism's been, in the United States, journalism's been around, for 250 years, right? And you know, I always say, that, in the United States, Thomas Paine, didn't write, the Crisis, or whatever, the freedom of the press movement. It was not written, it was not created to sell, furniture, or to sell cars, or to, or to supply classified advertising. It was, journalism will survive. It's just right now, it's just it's a very strange state of things.
Mhm.
The question is, how do you pay for it? That's what we're trying to figure out. How do you pay for journalism? And right now, it's still hard to figure that out.
Yeah, of course. And I think especially we're in the situation where everything has changed from global, national, and everything's like really, really filtered down to like it's as local as it gets. Like, you can go online and you can see the news from like the smallest back end town, like, in
Sure,
anywhere in the world. And
sure.
as amazing as that is, that's kind of helping journalism thrive. But like at the same time, it's almost as if the market's like saturated. It's almost like there's kind of, how are people thriving on this anymore?
Yeah, again, it's a weird one, because you have it's the thing is you have to figure out how to do it, and basically pay for it, and get people to consume it, who want to consume it, who want to pay for it. And the old model is just not there anymore. Now there's more of, you have social media sites that are covering local news, just sort of in a curated, funky way. It's all part of the menagerie of the news business right now.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems to be. So I'd like to talk about your career as a novelist now, especially with your debut novel, The Bystander, the first of the. I want to hopefully I get this right. The Lemaster Files. Is that
Correct.
if I
Correct.
pronounced that correctly?
Yes, you did.
The Lemaster File, perfect. Okay, so yeah, what can you tell us then about this? What was the sort of inspiration to transition into fictional writing and storytelling?
Well, I've always been a writer, so
Mhm.
as we sort of kind of gathered there, I wrote a business book years
Yeah.
ago, and I went to journalism school, and I've always been a PR writer. So I've written lots of articles, ghost written lots of articles, written, I don't know, a couple thousand press releases in my lifetime, and all kinds of other stuff. And I was when I was younger, I read a lot of fiction, and then when I kind of got married and had kids, and that was kind of one of the things that kind of that I didn't keep up with. I was like, I just didn't have as much time to read fiction, and so when I had free time, if I was on vacation, I usually read some kind of nonfiction book about something. I'd pick a topic and read a bunch of things about it. Um, and then when my kids, went to college, I kind of found myself a little bit more time. I found myself listening. I kind of discovered audiobooks, quite
Mhm.
honestly. And I listened to audiobooks when I exercise. And I kind of, got reacquainted with mysteries and thrillers. And I just had this idea, it's going on now 3 years ago, that I had I had an idea, and I'm just kind of crazy enough to try it. I was just crazy enough to try to write something. So there was an inciting incident. There was a thing that happened, a real life incident in 2022. A guy went into a mall in Indiana with a assault rifle, and he started shooting,
Mhm.
and he killed 3 people. But at the same time, there was a young man in the mall, in the food court. His name is Eli Dicken, and Eli Dicken's a real person. He was carrying his handgun, and he took out his gun and he shot the active shooter and killed him. And I was fascinated by this incident. I thought it was really interesting. I mean, first and foremost, Eli Dicken is a hero. He's a real hero. I mean, he saved people's lives, probably his own and other people, and like
Yeah.
he's a real hero. He's not just made up hero. And number one, and number two, I was just thought it was all very interesting because like, is this part of me was like, this is when you have, particularly in the United States, we have this, these gun rights conversations, arguments, whatever, fist fights over gun rights. And on one side of this, you say like, okay, guess what? The Second Amendment, the right to carry your firearm, that worked, right? And that's unassailable. That's true. It probably did. The fact that a private citizen is allowed to carry a gun in the mall, save people's lives. But at the same time, you kind of say, wait a second, is this the way it's supposed to be? I mean, are we supposed to need a gun when we go to the mall? Yeah. I'm going to buy, sneakers or trainers, as you guys say over there. I'm going to buy trainers. And I gotta have a gun, right? Yeah. And so to me, I just found the whole situation to be interesting. And so I started to think about this and like, this could be a backdrop for a novel, like these issues along with an incident like this. And so I wrote a novel. My protagonist is a television reporter whose name is Pete Lemaster, and it's the Lemaster Files. Right now it's a 3-book series. And he kind of the inciting incident for the novel is, Pete is out on a Friday night filming a kind of a feel-good story at a local retail complex, and a guy comes in with an assault rifle, but he's killed by an armed bystander, and the television reporter films the whole thing, and then the video goes viral, and it's the bystander becomes a folk hero, but all is not as it seems, Andy. All is not as it seems. And so that's the start of the novel. And I'm not giving anything away because that happens in the first chapter. And and it just kind of follows. There's a tale there. And so that's where it came from.
Yeah, incredible. Yeah, that sounds very good, and especially now that you've got like a couple of you're in the middle of writing, or is it you middle of writing, or have you finished the second book?
The second book's done. The second book comes out in May.
In May, perfect. Yep. And then have you started like the blueprint at least for the third book, or is it still?
Yeah, I'm about halfway through the third one. Okay. At least halfway through the first draft. I've got to get on my horse and finish the first draft in the next 2 months, I guess.
And is this like going to like concrete a 3-book series, or is there like room?
Honestly, I was very fortunate that I sent my manuscript to Tule Publishing. They're based in California, and they liked my book, but they really their marketing plan process is they like a series. They want to have more than one book, and I already had a pretty good idea for the second one, and so I felt comfortable that I could deliver 3 books. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I decided on. So I mean, there could be more in the future, but that's kind of going to be up to them, and I guess ultimately up to me. But I mean, if they want more, then I guess we'll talk about it. But so I felt comfortable committing to 3.
Mm-hmm. Of course,
and less comfortable committing to 4 or 5.
No, that's totally fair. And like, obviously you haven't written for a long time, but only really written like nonfiction and like press releases, things like that. Did you find that there was like a transition to go into nonfiction, or was it sort of because you had that much experience that it was a matter of just kind of, write sort of a similar process, but just maybe kind of tweaking things to make it like story, like flow?
A big difference for me. I mean, I think I tried to, because I made my protagonist a journalist, so I really try to follow kind of how that line of thinking is, and follow the line of thinking of way I'd follow a story if I was a reporter. And so a lot of that is true to form for me, and like I'm just calling on my own, my own past experiences and things like that. But the great thing about, and where I catch myself is that I'll write something, and then, further along in the book, further along in the story, I want to do something, take a turn, and I'll go, wait a second, that doesn't make sense. I can't do that because back in, chapter 3, I said this. And then I realized, wait a second, I can play God. I can go back. I can go back and I can say, I can make all of a sudden this person didn't say that, or they didn't do that, or we only infer it or we imply it or whatever. And I can change the fact pattern if I want. And that's the beauty of it. That's the beauty of it, is that you kind of go back. I mean, I try really hard to keep to do you think about continuity and that everything makes sense. And I don't want to have what I really strive for is that I want my novels to read as though they could really happen.
Yeah.
So that's where I think my strength lies, is that I can write something that where you read this and go, wait a second, that's a little crazy, but that could happen. Like that's kind of where that's kind of the lane that I put myself in, and so and again, there's it's not fantasy, it's not romantasy, it's more of like rip from the headlines kind of thriller stuff. So
yeah, and it's interesting as well because going from nonfiction to fiction, it's so much more than just kind of detailing things that have happened in chronological order. You have to focus on things like character development, and as you said, you get to play God. You have that full creative license to really kind of make the book go in whatever direction you see fit based on kind of how the story pans out. And obviously real life isn't really like as complicated as that at times. It can just be a lot more linear. And when it came to sort of writing about the characters, did you find that was kind of a bit more of a challenge as well, considering the fact that if you've ever been writing about events, people, for example, that it's just been a kind of here are the facts compared to,
right,
well, I have to completely create this person now.
Right. Yeah, no, it's a big challenge. It's a challenge for me, for sure. It's a very astute question, I should say. That you have to, you want to explain. I mean, for me, it's mainly and particularly in the first part when I'm writing a novel it's story. I want the story's got to work, right? It's got to work. If the story doesn't work, then I'm not gonna be able to write it. It's not gonna work for me. I'm not gonna be able to finish it. Story's got to work, and then you want the characters to be believable, and you want to have, and you also, but you don't want to spend so much time describing your characters that you neglect the story.
Yep.
And you also want to make sure that your characters are not so thin that they're not interesting. And so you have it's a fine line of where of character of what you're characterizing. But that's an area that I try to focus on, try to explain who my characters are. And it's also, you also walk that tightrope of spending so much time talking about the characters. We have too many characters, which is a trap I think a lot of novelists fall into. There's too many characters. It's kind of complicated. So I try to keep my stories kind of clean, kind of a pretty small number of people that are really involved in telling the tale.
Yeah, definitely. And it just fascinates me because I've interviewed a lot of writers before, and I always I'm very curious to hear their takes, especially on the sort of story writing process, because I've heard a lot of people just say it's if you have an idea, just get it down on the page and just keep going and going and going and going. And then obviously you have the other side of that, which would be the more kind of methodical approach, where it's just well, like you said, the story has to be there, the story has to make sense, and then everything kind of comes in after, whether I think it's kind of, once you have that kind of baseline, you can kind of have a bit more of an idea as to where the rest of it's going to go in terms of the characters, whether it's going to open the door for more sequels and things like that. And because it just, like I say, it fascinates me because I interviewed someone recently and they were saying about the characters, and in that some of their books very, very, very deep in the characters. In other books it's very much well, it's a sort of spy novel kind of James Bond type thing. It's just, it doesn't need to go that deep. They're going to be the big hero, and that's just suspend your disbelief in a sense.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's a couple of things in there that I would say. I mean, one is that first thing is that every time you meet somebody, you don't decode them right away, right? You don't know, they don't necessarily, give themselves up, and we've all met people who are just kind of keep their true self, close to the vest for one
Oh, yeah.
reason or another. And you ask them a question, and I'm a really inquisitive person, so I'll meet somebody and I'll ask them questions. And I used to have these issues with like coworkers when I worked for a PR agency, and you'd meet somebody and go have lunch with a new person. And I ask them a bunch of questions, and you could just see they're uncomfortable. Like, oh, I don't want, I don't tell people my, what those types of, I don't answer those types of questions. So sometimes, you have to be careful. You have to, but the point is there are different kinds of people out there.
Yeah, of course.
But really when it comes to writing a novel, they say there's two types of writers. There's plotters and there's pantsers. And the plotter is somebody who's like a detailed outliner who knows everything that's going to happen in their book, and then they go back and fill it in. And pantsers are more kind of fly by the seat of their pants, hence the term. And I'm more of a pantser. I'm more of a kind of, I have an idea, a general idea of where the story's going, but I know how it's going to begin. I know how it's going to end, I think. And then it's kind of, and I know what I know generally what I want to say, but most of the storytelling happens in the process. Like I don't have a 10-page outline of my book. I've got a 1-page outline, this is what I'm going to write about. And to me, that's where it's almost for me personally, the creativity comes, in the rewriting. It comes in thinking about the story, when I go to bed at night or when it hits me in the shower or whatever. And I'll go, well, wait, what if I do this? What if I do that? It doesn't all just come out in the first draft. And I don't think I could, I wouldn't know how to outline like that. I mean, I'm sure I could be taught or someone could show me how, but I don't know how to do it like that. And part of me, being quite honestly, is that I don't want to copy anybody else. So
Yeah.
like, I just want, like, I want my books to be my style. And it's not because whatever, maybe it's a little bit selfish, maybe it's a little bit egomaniacal, but more than anything else, I don't want to fall into a rut of copying someone else. So I don't want to sit there and go, oh, well, this is what you're supposed to do. Like, okay, well, if we're all writing what you're supposed to do, then guess what? Everything's gonna be the same.
Yeah.
So,
of course. And it's especially important, when you're writing a series of books like you are, that it has to stay in that same style. It has, because otherwise it just won't read consistently. Like you have, your first book, The Bystander. If The Pawn doesn't read in a similar kind of way, then it's gonna kind of seem like it's a completely different story and it's not a follow-on from the original, and then so on and so forth.
Yeah, I know, and that's what that's the series idea, is that you get someone to, you get somebody to read the first one, then they read the second one, then they read the third one. They binge read you, or they discover one and go back and read the first one or whatever. And that's the idea. That's what you're trying to do, is get that, kind of multiple bites kind of at the reader. And yeah, absolutely, you have to have that level of continuity. It's there. Some writers, they're the big guns of the industry. They've got their own. They've carved their own way. John Grisham writes generally standalone novels, and he writes one big novel every year, and it's a standalone, and it's in his style. And if you're a Grisham guy, you know what you're gonna get. And that's the same thing with James Patterson or with Colleen Hoover, or whatever, any of the big writers. You have an expectation what you're going to get, but not necessarily the same characters each time. I think Colleen Hoover has only written one follow-on book. I think all of her books are all standalones, for example.
Yeah. And do you think that you might go into that kind of standalone territory, like eventually after you finish the Lemaster Files?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it'd be worth it. It'd be fun to do it. It'd be fun to try it. But one mountain at a time, man. One mountain at a time.
For sure. Well, John, listen, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on Behind the Camera podcast. Thank you so much for your time. Just before we wrap up, for the sake of the audience, where can we find you and your works?
Sure. So my book is called The Bystander. It's available pretty much anywhere books are sold online. So Amazon and BarnesandNoble.com and all the international outlets as well. In the U.S., you can order it from your local bookstore. They're not going to probably not going to have it on the shelf, but you can order it from your local bookstore. I'm also a big fan of what's called bookshop.org, and bookshop.org benefits if you buy a book from bookshop.org. They basically ask you what your local bookstore is, and then a portion of the sale goes to the local bookstore. So that's a great way if you want to buy a hard copy. I think that's probably just in the U.S. And then so the Bystander, again, it should be easy to find to buy a copy, I would hope. Then my website is byjohndavid.com, and that's a Substack and has a newsletter and all that kind of stuff. And I'm also on Instagram at byjohndavid, and I'm on X at John P. David, and I'm on what else? I think I'm on Facebook as my author page is by John David. So fairly trying to be consistent, and should be fairly easy to find.
Fantastic stuff. Well, yes, definitely make sure to check out John and his work, especially The Bystander, and in the upcoming book, The Pawn, as well, in the Lemaster Files. Once again, John, thank you so much for your time. Been an absolute pleasure chatting.
Thanks so much. It was great.
And there you have it for episode 86 of Behind the Camera. Massive thank you to John David for joining me this week. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to check out his book, The Bystander, and give him a follow. All links in the description below. If you'd also like to stay connected with Behind the Camera, you can also find all of my links in the description, including socials, merch, and the pre-order for my upcoming book, Behind the Camera, The Journey So Far, releasing on the 5th of March. And also, massive thank you to all patrons. Your support is hugely appreciated. Thank you all for listening, for the support, and for being part of the journey. Until next time, take care, stay creative, and I'll see you soon. But until then, peace.